friends! Today we're going to read A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today, she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on her pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. Her mother ran into the room, and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens!" she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Miss Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camilla answered, "but just look at me." "You got to get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with all those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any cough, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollably twitching?" "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Miss Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called Camilla Crayon, a knight of the living lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal. But when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red and white and blue, and she broke out. Other kids thought this was great. One yelled, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" And a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you could change channels on a TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Miss Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. And I've been getting calls from other parents. They're afraid those stripes are contagious." Camilla was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago, everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough for one day. Well, yes, I see," Dr. Bumble mumbled when Miss Cream phoned him the next day. "I think I better bring in the specialist. We'll be right over." About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. "This is Dr. Grope, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young." The specialist went to work on Camilla. They squeezed and jabbed, tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. "Well, it's not the mumps," concluded Dr. Grope. "Or the measles," said Dr. Sponge. "Definitely not chickenpox," put in Dr. Cricket. "Or sunburn," said Dr. Young. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. "Take one of each before bed," said Dr. Grope. Then they filed out of the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camilla took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she didn't feel different. But when she got up to get dressed, her clothes didn't fit. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Miss Cream called. But this time, instead of the specialist, he brought the experts. Dr. Groud and Mr. Mellon were the finest scientist minds in all the land. Once again, Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at, and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers, then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Groud finally spoke. It might be a virus, he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camilla. Or possibly some form of bacteria, said Mr. Mellon. Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. Or it could be fungus, said Dr. Groud. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla, then at each other. We need to go over the numbers again back at the lab, Dr. Groud explained. We'll call you when we know something. But the experts haven't had a clue, much less a cure. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from everyday channels were outside her house, telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing color kid. Soon, a huge crowd was camped out in front of the lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies, from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added poor Camilla's strange appearance, until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries, crystals and feathers, and a long furry tail. But nothing worked. One day, a woman who called herself an environmentalist therapy claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said. Breathe deeply and become one with your room. I wish I hadn't said that. Wish you hadn't said that, Camilla said. Camilla groaned. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth, her nose was the dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. What are we going to do? Cried Miss Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse. She began to sob. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it and stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a strawberry. Excuse me, she said brightly, but I think I can help. Sorry, my book's falling apart. She went to Camilla's room and looked around. My goodness, she said with a shake of her head. What we have here is a bad case of the stripes. One of the worst I've ever seen. Here, she pulled out a container of small green beans from her bag. Here, these might do the trick. Oh, these magic beans? Asked Miss Cream. Oh, no, replied the old kind woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I bet you'd like some. Camilla, wouldn't you? She asked. Camilla wanted a big, heaping plate full of lima beans, but more than just about anything. But she was still afraid to admit. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the bags back in the beans and started towards the door. Camilla watched as the old woman walked away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she thought she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, said the old woman with a smile. She took a handful of lima beans and popped them into Camilla's mouth. Mmm, said Camilla. Suddenly, the branches, the feathers, and the squiggly tail began to disappear. The whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camilla, and everything was back to normal. I'm cured! she shouted. Yes, said the woman. I knew that was the real you, was in there somewhere. She patted Camilla on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterwards, Camilla wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care. She ate all the lima beans she wanted. She never even had a touch of stripes again. Thanks, friends, for joining me.